Hi all, I thought I'd just give you real quick feedback, maybe 10 minutes of feedback on some of the passages that you looked at this week. I thought you all have done great work at getting into the passages. I like the use of secondary commentaries and resources, especially the ones that are considered more, original meaning savvy. For example, Paul Ellingworth, Hebrews commentary, or Doug Moo on Romans. Those are always considered good original meaning commentaries. And I thought you all have done very well with this assignment. So just to push the envelope a little further, what might I say to try to earn my pay for this part? First of all, there's always that question of when a narrative is being descriptive and when a narrative is being prescriptive. So to what extent is, I have Acts 6 up on my screen because I figured you wanted to look at the Bible rather than my email. But to what extent is Acts 6 describing what happened, and to what extent is it saying, and this was great? I do personally believe that the what's called the evaluative point of view of the book of Acts, that is the point of view that Luke wants us to take. It's technically anonymous, but I'm going to say Luke. The perspective that Luke wants us to take toward this event, I believe that Luke has presented it in a way so that the kinds of things you take from this event probably are more or less the right things. The history behind it, of course, could have been a little sloppier. So it seems to me that probably there was some barrier between Peter and the Jerusalem leadership who spoke Aramaic and the Greek-speaking Christian community. They probably did need somebody who spoke Greek to minister for them. Peter may have all the best intentions in the world, but he just probably wasn't real fluent in Greek, I would guess, at this point. And so having somebody who actually speaks Greek, somebody who's actually in the community, helping them out. You'll notice that this group of 7 doesn't look like a bipartisan committee to feed all the widows in Jerusalem. All of these names are Greek names. One of them is even a proselyte. And so what comes out of this really is not a committee to feed all the widows in Jerusalem. What comes out of this event are people in the Greek-speaking community to minister to the Greek-speaking community. And even though we think of this as the deacon passage, this is often the passage where the idea of there being deacons comes from. These people don't go on in the book of Acts to be deacons. Stephen goes on to be a preacher. Philip is called Philip the evangelist. And so even though the idea of a deacon is reflected in this passage, in terms of the history, these people weren't deacons. They went on, they were scattered. They went on to actually become evangelists and ministers. So this problem, God can use problems to advance the church. This conflict, I'm sure it was unpleasant. I'm sure Peter didn't enjoy it. When I read this, I feel a Peter who's maybe a little too defensive. Denial's not just a river in Egypt. I need to pray. I need to spend more time praying. I don't have time to wait tables. You can kind of, at least that's the way it feels to me. It's my kind of reader response to it. But conflict, even though it's not pleasant, it went on to actually serve a need, and we found the church soon having more ministers to reach the Greek-speaking community of Jerusalem as a result. With regard to the Philippians 4 passage, I hoped that you remembered back in the leadership course where you read that article about patronage and how Paul walks a fine line in Philippians 4. He wants to thank the Philippians for their support. He's grateful to the Philippians to the support, but at the same time, he doesn't want to become entangled with the strings of patronage because if you let somebody serve as your patron, then that creates a kind of obligation back to them. And so Paul very cleverly, inspiredly, shall we say, thanks the Philippians for fulfilling their duty to God. In other words, they have appropriately returned their obligation to God as their patron. What they have not done is made Paul obligated to them. Paul himself, he says, I've learned to be content. God will supply all my need. Basically, I appreciate you doing this. I don't need it. You see the fine line he's doing. It's just the reminder that there are deep cultural factors involved in these words that we might miss because the deep structure behind the words isn't our deep cultural structure. You all did well with Philippians 2, so I think for time's sake I'll move on to Romans 15. Romans 15 raises the question of what are the disputable issues in our day and age. Obviously, whether or not to eat meat from a marketplace where the meat may have come from a nearby temple. Obviously, that's not the issue that we have today. The issue that we have today, our disputable issues are much different, and it's a moving target. And so, what is a disputable issue and what isn't a disputable issue? When we see things coming down the pike in the church and we begin to debate over things, it's easy for one side to say, well, this is clear in Scripture, and for the other side to say, well, this isn't clear in Scripture. And I think this is an important thing to let sink in, is that those who take what Paul actually calls the weak position, the more conservative position, those who take the don't do it position, will always argue that they are arguing from Scripture. They will always argue that they're being biblical, and maybe they are. And I think one of the key takeaways I have from Romans 14 is that God ultimately is the referee. God's not fooled. We tend, I think, to think that if we can't ensure that the right decision is made here, if we can't stop someone from getting away with stuff, down here, then somehow we've messed up. But God is the one who makes sure people don't get away with stuff. People may say, well, it just doesn't bother my conscience to do X. And we may think, no, you're just saying that to get out of something. But ultimately, it doesn't matter whether we catch them. God is the one who is the line call. God is the one who, as Romans 14 says, blessed is the one who isn't condemned by what they say is okay. And so I think it's important for us to realize that ultimately we have to trust God. A lot of times we try to take God's role. We think that we have to catch them, that we have to create the rules that keep the people from doing the wrong thing. This is, in my strange mind, I think of some of the recent beheading by the ISIS militants in Iraq. I think that if they really believed in their version of Allah, then they wouldn't have to be militant. Their God would take care of it. Actually, their insistence on doing it themselves reflects a lack of faith that their Allah will actually do it for them. And in the same way, do we sometimes reflect a lack of faith when we feel like we have to be the one who is judge and jury? We have to be the one to catch the sinner. And if we don't do it, they're going to get away with it. Well, doesn't that implicitly reflect a lack of faith in a God who sees everything and a God who is ultimately the judge? Anyway, a thought. So what are the disputable issues today? I think my starting point is the disputable issues, for the most part, are issues that Christians dispute. People who truly love God with all their heart, people who are truly surrendered to God completely, and they seem to be living that out. When you have people who disagree on things, and there are two people who both are trying their best to submit to the Lord, and they disagree on something, well, let's call that a disputable issue, no matter what it is, and go from there. Final thought is on Acts 15. Acts 15 is again similar to Acts 6. To what extent is that description? To what extent is that prescription? I think that again, Luke has presented the way the conflict was resolved in Acts 15 as somewhat of an ideal way for that conflict to be resolved. The history behind it may have been more messy, but I think that Luke has presented it to us as somewhat of an ideal, where there are clear channels of authority. Once the decision is made, those that lose on the decision submit to the will of the majority. So I think there's much to be learned from that. Well, these are just 10 minutes of thoughts on some of the passages you looked at this week on some of the healthy churches, or are they, in the New Testament church. Thank you very much. See you online.